At Easter brunch, my brother demanded I hand over my beach house. When I refused, my father yelled, "You've always been the problem." They thought I was a childless pushover they could finally break. So I calmly called my lawyer and set a trap they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The ache in my lower back wasn't just from the cheap, wrought iron patio chair. It was a dull, throbbing reminder of the 48 straight hours I just spent at the studio, pushing my team through the final render submissions for the new city library. I was 47, exhausted, and running on nothing but caffeine and stubbornness. All I wanted was to sip my lukewarm tea, listen to the distant sounds of my nephews hunting for plastic eggs, and pretend for one afternoon that I wasn't the sole load-bearing wall for my entire family. Easter brunch at my father's house was a tradition I dreaded, but one I upheld out of a dwindling sense of duty. The house, a sprawling suburban relic my father, Kyle, hadn't updated since 1995, was packed. The air was thick with the smell of baked ham and my sister-in-law Emily's overwhelmingly floral perfume. My brother Elliot was holding court by the grill, a spatula in one hand and his ever-present phone in the other. He was telling a story, his voice booming with the false confidence of a man who worked in finance, but whose only real skill was leveraging other people's money. His wife, Emily, was filming him for her lifestyle social media feed, her smile as fixed and bright as the cubic zirconia on her ring. And then I told the guy, "Look, if you can't handle the risk, you don't deserve the reward." Elliot Braid and my father, Kyle, let out a bark of appreciative laughter. "That's my boy, cut from the same cloth," Kyle said, clapping Elliot on the shoulder. He turned his gaze on me, his eyes, still sharp and critical at 70, sweeping over me with familiar disapproval. "Nicola, you look tired, still working yourself to the bone for that company of yours." "Hello, Dad," I said, forcing a smile. "The firm is doing well, thank you." "Yeah, but what's it all for, right?" Elliot chimed in, walking over. He was 2 years younger than me, but he'd perfected the art of patronizing me since we were kids. "All that work, all that stress. You should see the hours Emily puts in, but at least that's for the family, for the boys." Emily drifted over, her phone still pointed in our general direction. "Oh, Elliot, stop. Nicola knows we appreciate her. Dedication." Her eyes scanned my simple linen dress, lingering for a moment, and I knew she was calculating its cost and finding it lacking in brand name prestige. I ignored the jab. The boys seem happy. The egg hunt was a success. "They're growing so fast," Elliot said, his tone shifting from mockery to a practiced, heavy sigh. "Which brings us to, well, something we need to discuss, as a family." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I recognized this preamble. It was the same one he used when he needed me to co-sign a car loan, invest in a shady startup, or pay for my father's new roof. "Elliot," I said, keeping my voice level, "it's Easter. Can it wait?" No, this is the perfect time," Elliot said, gesturing expansively. "We're all here. Dad, come on." Kyle ambled over, his expression carefully neutral, which was always a sign he was in on the plan. Emily stood just behind Elliot, her smile unwavering, her camera now conveniently off. "Nicola," Elliot began, puffing his chest out. "We've been talking, me, Dad, Emily, and, well, we've come to a decision about the beach house." My hand tightened on my teacup, the beach house. It wasn't just a beach house. It was my house. The one I had designed from scratch, the blueprints of which had won me my first major award. The one I had built on a ragged piece of coastline using the first significant paycheck from my own architectural firm. It was my sanctuary, my masterpiece, my refuge. "What about the beach house, Elliot?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Well, it's sitting empty most of the year," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "It's a huge asset just, wasting away, and me and Emily, we've been thinking, the boys are at the perfect age. They need the ocean air. They need memories." So go, make memories, I said. You know you're welcome to use it, as long as you clear the dates with me first. See, that's the thing, Elliot said, shaking his head. That's not really ours, is it? Having to ask permission. It's awkward. It doesn't feel like family. Kyle grunted his agreement. He's right, Nicola. It's not right. What are you saying, Elliot? He took a deep breath, and the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it. LL hit me like a physical blow. We think you should give it to us. Sign it over. I mean, let's be honest, Nicola. You don't even have kids, you're never there, you're always at the office. What do you even need it for? We'd get so much more use out of it. The air left my lungs. The casual cruelty, the entitlement. It was staggering, but it wasn't new. This was just the culmination of 1,000 smaller paper cuts. I set my cup down on the glass-topped table, the clink sharp in the sudden silence. No, I said. Elliot's face, so recently benevolent, tightened. What do you mean, no? Don't be selfish, Nick. This is for the family. I said no, Elliot. The beach house is mine. I designed it. I built it. I paid for it. It is not up for discussion. It is not yours, and it will never be yours just because you feel entitled to it. The smile was gone from Emily's face, replaced by a pinched, reptilian anger. You see, Elliot, this is what she's like. She has so much, and she just hoards it. She can't stand to see anyone else happy. You've got your own house, Emily, I countered, my voice rising. A house, I might add, that I helped you get the down payment for. That was a loan, Elliot spat. A loan you've never made a single payment on, I shot back. That's when it happened. The thin veneer of civility cracked and shattered. Elliot's face went purple with rage. He wasn't used to being told no. He was used to me sighing, rolling my eyes, and eventually capitulating. You ungrateful, he started, his voice rising to a shout. He grabbed the empty water glass from the table and, in a fit of theatrical, impotent rage, hurled it against the brick patio. It shattered, sending shards skittering across the stone. My nephews, who had wandered over, froze in terror. Elliot, Emily shrieked, more surprised than scared. But it was my father's voice that cut through the silence. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated disappointment, directed entirely at me. You've done it now, Nicola, he yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. Look at this. You've ruined Easter, you've upset your brother, you've always been the problem. Always. The world went very still. All the noise, the birds, the distant traffic, the hammering in my own chest faded away. You've always been the problem. It was the sentence that had defined my life. The problem for needing braces. The problem for wanting to go to college instead of getting married. The problem for starting a business instead of caretaking them in their old age. I was the problem because I was the provider, and they were the dependents, and that imbalance had finally become too much for their pride to bear. I looked at my father's furious face, at my brother's petulant rage, at my sister-in-law's greedy disappointment. I felt the glass shards under my shoe, and in that moment, something I hadn't even realized was broken inside me didn't just snap, it vaporized. It was gone. The guilt, the obligation, the endless, draining sense of duty. I stood up, my back screaming in protest, but I felt strangely, terrifyingly calm. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and bypassed my favorites. I dialed my lawyer, David, who had my firm on retainer. Elliot scoffed. What are you doing? Calling the cops? Going to have your own brother arrested on Easter? SHH, I said, holding up a single finger. I put the phone on speaker. It rang twice. David, I said, my voice as clear and cold as the winter ocean. It's Nicola. Nicola, his voice was professional, instantly alert. Is everything all right? I wasn't expecting a call on a Sunday. Everything is fine, David. In fact, everything is perfectly clear. I need you to initiate the transfer we discussed. There was a half-second of silence. The scorched earth protocol. Are you certain, Nicola? You know, once this is done, it's done. There's no going back. Elliot's sneer was back. What transfer? Are you caving? Are you transferring the house? He looked at Emily and laughed, a short, ugly sound. See, I told you she'd. Initiate the transfer, David, I said, my eyes locked on my brother's. It's time they learned the truth. As you wish, David said. I'll file the papers electronically. The dissolution of the primary trust will trigger the automated notifications to all beneficiaries. It should all be finalized within the hour. Thank you, David. I hung up. Elliot's victorious smile faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. What was that? What trust? What notifications? What did you just do? 30 minutes, I said, picking up my purse and sliding my sunglasses on. That's about how long it should take for the first emails to go out. The text alerts are usually faster. What text alerts? Kyle demanded, his voice now laced with a genuine, unfamiliar threat of fear. Nicola, what did you do? I smiled, a real, genuine smile, and it felt like pulling a muscle I hadn't used in years. You wanted the beach house, Elliot. You just ensured you'll never set foot in it again. In fact, you just cost yourself your house, too. I turned and walked away, the sound of their sputtering, confused rage following me down the driveway. The betrayal, I thought as I got into my car, wasn't just them demanding the house. The betrayal was me allowing them to believe they had the right to ask for it. And that betrayal was now, finally, over. The drive away from my father's house was a blur. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly ebbing away, leaving a familiar, hollow ache in its place. I had replayed that scene or versions of it in my head 1,000 times. The what-if scenario where I finally stood up for myself. But the reality of it, the shattered glass, the raw hatred in my father's voice, the sheer, animalistic greed on Elliot's face, was more grotesque than I could have imagined. My phone, sitting in the passenger seat, buzzed, a text from David. It's done. The dominoes are falling. A wave of nausea rolled over me. I had to pull over, parking my car on the quiet, tree-lined street of a neighborhood I didn't recognize. I rested my head against the steering wheel, the smell of leather and my own faint perfume filling my lungs. The emotional and physical distress was overwhelming. The exhaustion from my work marathon, combined with the adrenaline crash, made the world feel tilted and unreal. For a decade, I had been living a carefully constructed lie, not just to my family, but to myself. I had told myself that subsidizing their lives was the price of peace. That being the successful daughter meant papering over the cracks in their finances, their marriages, their entire lives. I paid for Elliot's sure-thing investments that always went bust. I paid for Kyle's property taxes and the new car he insisted he deserved in his retirement. I even paid for Emily's vanity, influencer, equipment, all in the name of family. And what had it gotten me? A smashed glass at my feet and the accusation that I, the one holding the entire rotten structure up, was the problem. My phone buzzed again, this time with an incoming call. The name on the screen made my stomach clench, Elliot. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the decline button. But I knew him. Rejecting the call would only send him into a further frenzy. He would call Kyle, who would call me, and the cycle would continue. The only way to manage this was to control the narrative. I took a deep, shuddering breath and answered, putting it on speaker. What did you do? He didn't yell, it was worse. His voice was a low, seething hiss, choked with a rage that was far more potent than the performative glass smashing. I did what you've been forcing me to do for 10 years, Elliot, I said, my voice weary. Don't give me that, I just got an email. A legal notice. Notice of trust dissolution. What is this, Nicola? What is the Heron Hill Family Trust? It's the trust I set up in 2015, I said simply. The one that owns the beach house. The one that holds the mortgage on your house. The one that pays the lease on your car and funds the credit card you use for business expenses. There was a dead, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his breathing, quick and shallow. He was finally connecting the dots. You're lying, he whispered, but the conviction was gone. The bravado had evaporated. Dad holds the mortgage on my house. He co-signed. No, Elliot, I said, closing my eyes. Dad thinks he co-signed. but his credit was shot after the 2008 crash. He couldn't co-sign for a library card. I set up the trust to secure the loan. I am the sole guarantor. The trust is the lender. But why? His voice was small, the voice of the little boy I used to defend on the playground. Because you asked for help and I was weak. I didn't want to see you fail. I didn't want to see Dad lose his house. So I built a cage of gold and locked us all inside it. I told myself it was to protect you, but it was just to manage you. So, the transfer, he said, his voice trembling. You're not giving me the beach house. No, Elliot, I'm selling it. I'm liquidating the trust's primary asset. And with the trust dissolved, all subsidiary assets, all the loans, the leases, the lines of credit, are being called in, effective immediately. I heard a sharp, strangled sound like a gasp or a sob. You wouldn't, my house, my family. You should have thought of that before you demanded mine, I said. You should have thought of that before you let Dad call me the problem. You all seem to think I was just a walking, talking ATM with no feelings. You forgot something. Forgot what? He choked out. You forgot that I was the one who built the entire system, and the architect is always the one who knows where the load-bearing walls are. I paused, letting the silence stretch, the weight of his new reality settling over him. You had forgotten one crucial thing, Elliot. I am, and have always been, smarter than you. I hung up. The silence in the car was absolute. The cold, changed behavior I'd expected had arrived, but not in the way I'd anticipated. The blustering, arrogant brother was gone, replaced by the terrified whimper of a man who just realized the floor had disappeared from under him. My phone immediately began to ring again. This time, it was Kyle. I let it ring and ring and ring until it went to voicemail. The sense of nausea was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This was the immediate aftermath. This was the first wave. The shock was setting in. But the true conflict, the real unpacking of the deception I had maintained for a decade, was yet to come. I had built the beach house as a monument to my success. It had instead become a monument to my family's greed. And now I was tearing it down, stone by meticulous stone. The foreshadowing of my internal thought, they had forgotten one crucial thing, was no longer a hint. It was a stated fact. They had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten I was the architect. And I was about to remind them what happens when you try to tear down an architect's masterpiece. You end up buried in the rubble. To understand the explosion on the patio, you have to understand the decade of dry tinder I'd been carefully stacking around us. It all started with my father, Kyle. He had spent his life as a construction supervisor, a man who believed in sweat, calluses, and the unquestionable authority of the patriarch. When he retired, the world he understood, a world of defined roles, of a man providing and a family obeying, was already fading. His pension was smaller than he'd boasted, his savings were meager, and his pride was brittle as spun glass. I, on the other hand, was thriving. My firm, launched with a loan I'd paid off in 5 years, was winning contracts to design museums, libraries, and sustainable public spaces. My success was a quiet, constant rebuke to his worldview. His daughter, was supposed to be a nurse or a teacher. She was supposed to marry a man like him and produce grandchildren. She was not supposed to be flying to Chicago for a keynote speech or owning a piece of prime coastal real estate before she was 40. My devotion to him in the early years was absolute. I was the good daughter. I paid for his mortgage shortfall after his retirement, blaming it on a bank error. I upgraded his truck, claiming my firm had a sponsorship deal he could benefit from. Every financial prop was disguised as a fluke, a perk, or a gift, all designed to protect his fragile ego. I loved my father, and I spent a decade sacrificing my own financial security to insulate him from the consequences of his own poor planning. Then came Elliot and Emily. Elliot had followed my father into the man's world of finance, or so he claimed. In reality, he was a mid-level salesman with a taste for luxury cars and a crippling inability to live within his means. He saw my success not as an inspiration, but as a resource. He was my little brother, the one I'd read bedtime stories to. So when he came to me, terrified he was going to lose everything after a bad investment, I stepped in. That was the birth of the Heron Hill Family Trust. It was, at the time, my most clever design. I set it up as a separate legal entity, funded by my own firm's profits. Officially, I was just the trustee. It allowed me to lend Elliot the money for his house, to pay off his spiraling credit card debt, and to give him a salary as a consultant for the trust's property management division, which consisted entirely of him occasionally visiting the beach house. And Emily was the gasoline on the fire. We met when she was a fledgling influencer, a term that at the time meant she posted grainy photos of her lattes. She was polished, with a bright, disingenuous smile and a razor-sharp assessment of everyone's net worth. Her profession, as far as I could tell, was aspiring to wealth. I remember the first time I hosted them at the beach house. Elliot was impressed, but in the way a child is impressed by a new toy. Emily was calculating. She walked through the space, her acrylic nails tapping on the reclaimed timber beams I'd sourced from a 19th century barn. "It's nice, Nicola," she'd said, her eyes not on me but on the ocean view. "A bit. Sterile, maybe, but the footprint is incredible. Do you know what the land value alone is? I could flip this for a 7-figure profit in a week." "I'm not selling Emily," I had said, forcing a laugh. "I built it." "Oh, I know," she'd purred, "but it's just so much house for one person. It's almost selfish." Over the years, her comments became more pointed. She was the one who started the "UD. Aunt even have kids" narrative. She was the one who would post photos of her boys on the beach house deck with captions like, "Making memories in the family vacation home? Blessed." She was the one who, I later discovered, had been telling my father that I was a miserable workaholic who didn't deserve what I had. She was the primary antagonist, the one actively influencing Elliot, who in turn preyed on Kyle's old-fashioned sensibilities. Emily was the strategist, Elliot was the muscle, Kyle was the moral justification. They formed a perfect, toxic triangle with my bank account at the center. My sacrifices became their expectations. My generosity became their allowance. My beach house became their future inheritance. I had been so devoted to the idea of family, so desperate to be the good daughter and the supportive sister, that I had bankrolled the very people who were now trying to tear me down. The betrayal wasn't just the demand for the house. It was the realization that they had been planning this, that they had sat around a dinner table and decided that I, the architect of their entire lifestyle, was now an obstacle to be removed. The polished, smiling Emily, with her vague profession and her inappropriate interest in my assets, was the one who had drawn up the battle plans. And my father and brother had eagerly signed up to fight. The 24 hours after the brunch from hell were a blur of frantic voicemails and angry, incoherent texts. Elliot had gone from terror to rage, leaving me a 3-minute message that was just a string of curses and threats. Kyle left a different, more wounding kind. "Your mother would be so ashamed of you, Nicola. You are tearing this family apart. Fix this." Fix this, that was my role. I was the family's designated fixer. But as I sat in my minimalist, sun-drenched office at my firm, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside my keyboard, I felt a strange, cold calm. The turning point wasn't just the phone call to David. It was the realization that I wasn't just a victim. I was an architect. I had the blueprints. And it was time to move from defense to offense. I had spent the last 5 years as a passive strategist, building financial firewalls to manage my family. Now, I had to become an active one to survive them. The clever trap wasn't just the trust itself, it was the nature of the trust. When I set it up, David, my lawyer, had insisted on a catastrophic dissolution clause. It was a standard feature for high-net-worth individuals worried about lawsuits or hostile takeovers. It meant that if I, the primary benefactor and trustee, triggered it, the trust wouldn't just unwind, it would liquidate. All assets would be sold at market value, and all debts would be called due immediately. There was no 30-day grace period, no negotiation. It was a financial guillotine. And for the past 10 years, I had been the one paying the quarterly taxes on the trust's income. I had been paying the insurance on Elliot's house. I had been funding the allowance that Kyle received, which he thought was just an investment dividend from a long-dead stock. My family thought I was a pushover. They had forgotten that my profession wasn't just art, it was math, it was logistics, it was contracts and consequences. I called David. "They're panicking," I said. "As they should be," David's voice was grim. "The first notice of default on Elliot's mortgage just went out. The bank that holds the note, which is, of course, the trust, has informed him that the property will be seized and sold in 30 days if the full balance isn't paid." "A balance he can't pay," I finished. "Precisely, and Kyle, the car leasing company, also a subsidiary of the trust, is scheduling a repossession for tomorrow morning. And his dividend check for next month, it's not coming." A part of me, the part that was still the good daughter, winced. "David, are we sure about this?" "Nicola," he said, his voice softening for a moment, "I'm not just your lawyer, I'm your friend. I sat in this office with you 3 years ago when you discovered Emily had forged your signature to get a $20,000 line of credit. I was here when Elliot borrowed your car and wrecked it, leaving you with the liability. I've watched them bleed you dry. You're not tearing the family apart. You're lancing a wound. It's time." He was right. The shift was complete. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist. "Okay," I said, my voice firm. "They're going to fight back. Emily specifically, she's not stupid." "She's not," David agreed. "But she's greedy, and that makes her sloppy. What's our next move?" This is where my professional skills came into play. I hadn't just built houses. I had built a network. "I need an investigator," I said. "Not just any pie, I need a forensic accountant. Emily has been living large, and I know Elliot's salary from the trust and his mediocre sales job don't cover her lifestyle. She's been posting FR. Designer boutiques, weekend trips to the city, new furniture. It's all over her social media. I want to know where that money is coming from. I have a feeling she's been a lot busier than just influencing." "I have the perfect person," David said. "She's discreet, fast, and she hates people like Emily." "Good," I said, looking at the skyline of the city I had helped to build. "While she's digging into Emily, I'm going to do some digging of my own." Elliot's rage on the patio. It wasn't just entitlement. It was panic. He needed that house. I want to know why. I opened my laptop and pulled up the public records for the county where Elliot lived. I started cross-referencing property records, loan applications, and business filings. It didn't take long for a pattern to emerge. Elliot wasn't just over-leveraged, he was drowning. He had taken out second and third mortgages, not on his own house, which the trust controlled, but on other properties. Wait, not other properties. He had taken out hard money loans against my beach house. My blood ran cold. How was that possible? I owned it outright. Or so I thought. No, the trust owned it. I dug deeper. Elliot, as a consultant for the trust's property management, had limited signatory power for maintenance and upkeep. He must have used that small bit of authority to misrepresent himself to predatory lenders, to take out high-interest loans against an asset that wasn't his, claiming he was acting on the trust's behalf. He was committing fraud. The smashed glass, the demand, the panic, it all made sense. The loans were coming due. He wasn't trying to get the house for his family's memories. He was trying to get his hands on the deed so he could sell it, pay off the loan sharks, and cover his tracks before I found out. He wasn't just trying to steal my house. He was trying to frame me for his own crimes. The investigation was no longer about getting justice. It was about my own survival. The next 2 days were the quietest of my life. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, ignoring the cascade of texts and calls from numbers I didn't recognize, flying monkeys, all of them, no doubt, my father's sister, my cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in years, all suddenly experts on my selfishness. I let the forensic accountant and David do their work. I, in turn, worked. I finalized the library renders. I reviewed structural plans for a new housing project. I put one foot in front of the other. The call came on Wednesday. "We've got her," the accountant, a no-nonsense woman named Maria, said. And you were right, she's not just sloppy, she's arrogant. It turned out Emily's influencer career was a front for a different kind of business. She had partnered with a shady local realtor, the same one, I noted with a grimace, who had been advising Elliot. They were running a small-scale property fraud scheme. Emily would use her social media to identify wealthy, older, or absent homeowners, people like me, and the realtor would then use forged documents to list the properties for short-term, cash-only rentals, pocketing the money. They were essentially squatting in other people's homes for profit. And the best part, she had been documenting it all. Maria had found a separate, private social media account where Emily bragged to a small circle of friends about her side hustle, complete with photos of her enjoying the homes she had illegally rented. She had even posted a picture from my beach house deck 6 months prior, captioned, "Testing out the merchandise. This one's going to be the big one. Boss Babe Hustle." She's been running this scheme for at least a year, Maria said. And the shady realtor is her partner in crime. They've been using Elliot's property management credentials from your trust as a cover to get access to listings. So Elliot wasn't just a victim of her influence. He was an active participant. My rage was a cold, clean, purifying fire. "And Elliot?" I asked. "The hard money loans? It's bad, Nicola," David's voice cut in. "He's in for over $300,000. He signed a personal guarantee, but he also forged trust documents to secure the loan against the beach house. That's a federal crime. These lenders aren't the bank, they're the kind of people who break kneecaps. He was desperate. He needed to sell that house, pay them off, and get out." The puzzle was complete. Their grand plan at Easter wasn't just a whim, it was an act of desperation. They had to bully me into giving them the house so they could sell it and cover up a felony. That evening, my doorbell rang. It was Elliot. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his expensive suit was rumpled, and he smelled faintly of stale whiskey. He had clearly been sleeping in his car. "You have to stop this, Nicola," he whimpered, pushing past me into my foyer. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, rat-like panic. They're calling me, every hour," they sighed. They know where Emily and the kids live. You have to call your lawyer. You have to reverse it. Just give them the beach house. It's just a house. You can build another one." I stood there in the clean, quiet entryway of my own home, and I looked at him. This was the brother I had protected. This was the man I had subsidized. "You didn't just want the house for memories, did you, Elliot?" I said, my voice soft. "What? No, yes, I mean. What does it matter? You have to help me." "You forged trust documents," I stated. It wasn't a question. His face went white. The blood drained from it so fast I thought he might faint. I don't know what you're talking about." "You took out $300,000 in hard money loans against my house, my asset. You used your maintenance credentials to commit fraud. You were going to let me take the fall, weren't you? When they couldn't get the money from you, they would have come after the trust. After me." He had no words. He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. "And Emily," I continued, "your hustler wife. She's been running a rental scam, using my trust as a cover. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was that stupid?" She's a boss babe," he stammered, the buzzword sounding pathetic and absurd in the heavy silence. "It's just a side hustle. It's not illegal." "It is, Elliot. It's wire fraud for a start, and conspiracy, and, well, I'm sure the list is long." You, bitch," he roared, his terror finally boiling back into rage. He lunged not at me but at a large ceramic vase in my entryway. He raised his fist. "You're going to pay, you're going to fix this." I didn't flinch. "I wouldn't do that," I said calmly. "First, that vase is a 15th century Ming antique, and you couldn't afford to replace it in 1,000 lifetimes. Second, you're on camera." He froze, his fist in the air. He looked around wildly. "What?" I pointed to a discreet, pinhole-sized lens in the ceiling smoke detector. "My entire house is wired. Audio and video. I've been recording since you walked in the door. Every word, including your threat." His arm dropped to his side. His face crumpled. The poorly executed threat, the obvious, desperate lie about it not being illegal, it all just confirmed his guilt. He was a child in a man's suit, throwing a tantrum because his toys were being taken away. "You did this," he whispered, tears of self-pity welling in his eyes. "You destroyed us, all because you couldn't share." "No, Elliot," I said, walking to my front door and pulling it open. "I'm not the one who forged documents. I'm not the one who stole from people. And I'm not the one who demanded a house that wasn't mine. You did this. You, Emily, and Dad, you built this. I'm just the architect who's condemning the building." I pointed to the door. "Get out." He looked at me, his eyes full of a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. He knew he had lost. He knew I had him. He turned, and with a final, choked sob, he stumbled out into the night. I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and leaned against the solid wood. The first confrontation was over. But the case was just beginning. The video of Elliot's confession and threat was immediately sent to David. It was the keystone of our case. Elliot's desperate attempts to regain control had only served to hand me the weapon I needed to protect myself. Now, it was time to build the case against Emily. Maria, the forensic accountant, had uncovered the full, shocking extent of her deception. Emily's side hustle wasn't small-scale. She and her realtor partner had defrauded at least 15 homeowners across 3 counties. They had a system. Emily, the influencer, would identify and befriend the targets at open houses or charity events. The realtor would handle the forged leases. They had netted over $150,000 in illicit, untaxed cash in 18 months. Maria had already found testimony from 2 other victims who were preparing their own lawsuits. But the real, irrefutable proof was Emily herself. Her private, social media account was a digital diary of her crimes, full of bragging, arrogance, and a pathological need for validation. The only piece of the puzzle that was still struggling with loyalty was, predictably, my father. Kyle had been silent since his first, accusatory voicemail. He was ignoring Elliot's calls, and he was ignoring mine. He was, as he had always done in a crisis, sticking his head in the sand, hoping the problem, me, would just fix herself. This led to the second, more powerful confrontation, and it had to be with him. I drove to his house, the same house I had saved from foreclosure, the same house where I had been humiliated just days before. I didn't knock. I used my old key. He was in his recliner, a baseball game playing on a television so large it dwarfed the room. The house was a mess. Dishes were piled in the sink, and an air of neglect had settled over the living room. "You're not welcome here, Nicola," he said, not even looking at me. His voice was flat dead. "I'm not here for a social visit, Dad," I said, standing between him and the TV. I held out a thick manila envelope. "You need to see this." "I don't need to see anything," he grumbled, his eyes still on the game. "I just need you to stop this madness. Your brother is a wreck. You're tearing us all apart over a house." "He's a wreck because he's a felon, Dad." That got his attention. He finally looked at me, his eyes narrowed. "You watch your mouth, girl." "No, you watch this." I took a stack of papers from the envelope. "This is a forged loan document. That's Elliot's signature, illegally attesting that he is the owner of the Heron Hill Trust, applying for a $300,000 loan against my beach house. A loan, by the way, he has no way of repaying." He stared at the paper, his face pale. It's a misunderstanding. He was managing it for you." "This," I said, pulling out another document, "is a printout from Emily's private social media. Here she is, in my house, 6 months ago, bragging about how she's going to flip it. And here," I tossed a printed spreadsheet onto his lap, "is a list of the 15 other families she and her partner have defrauded. The police are very interested in this list." He looked at the papers, his hands trembling. He was a man from a generation that still believed in the sanctity of a signature, in the black and white of the law. He understood what he was seeing. He wouldn't," he whispered, but the denial was weak. He was still struggling, trying to find a way for this to be my fault. You pushed him, you had so much and you wouldn't share, you flaunted it, that beach house, your company. You made him feel small. The accusation hung in the air, a familiar toxic refrain. But this time I was ready. I didn't make him feel small, Dad. His own failures made him feel small. And you encouraged it. Every time you told me to fix it. Every time you took his side. Every time you told me I was the problem because I wouldn't just roll over and let him take what was mine. I played my final card. I took out my phone and played the audio from the video Elliot had so graciously provided. His voice, high and whining, filled the room. You have to help me. They said they know where Emily and the kids live. Just give them the beach house. It's just a house. Followed by the audio of his roar of bitch. And the clear, recorded sound of him lunging at my vase. Kyle listened, his face ashen. The spell, the lifetime of favoritism, the willful ignorance, it all shattered in that one moment. He heard the desperation, the weakness, the violence. He heard the son he had enabled, and he finally saw the truth. He looked up at me, his eyes for the first time, holding not just anger, but a deep, profound, bottomless shame. What have they done? He murmured. What you allowed them to do, I said, my voice not unkind, but firm. You let the rot spread, Dad, and now the only way to save the foundation is to tear the whole rotten structure down. I left the envelope on his lap. He didn't say a word as I walked out. The silence was his surrender. The antagonist's spell, the one that had bound my father to my brother's narrative, was finally, irrevocably broken. The showdown was not at a family event. It was, in a way, far more public and far more humiliating. David, brilliant and ruthless, had arranged it. Elliot and Emily, facing the loss of their home, the repossession of their cars, and the seizure of their bank accounts, had done the one thing I expected. They'd lawyered up. They had found a bottom-feeding attorney willing to file a countersuit, claiming that the Heron Hill Family Trust was an abusive and invalid entity, and that Elliot, as a verbal partner, was entitled to half of all its assets. It was a desperate, nonsensical Hail Mary built on lies and greed. David had arranged for a preliminary hearing in civil court, a deposition to review the evidence. Elliot and Emily showed up, both looking surprisingly polished. Emily was in a severe black dress, her hair pulled back, a picture of a wronged professional woman. Elliot, in his best suit, had regained some of his swagger. They had clearly been coached. They thought this was a negotiation. The deposition room was small and airless. It was just me and David on one side of the long, polished table, and Elliot, Emily, and their lawyer on the other. My clients, their lawyer began, a man with a cheap suit and shifty eyes, are prepared to settle this matter amicus. We're not settling, David cut in, sliding a file across the table. We're here to present the evidence we will be using in the criminal, not civil case. This is a courtesy. Emily's lawyer's smile faltered. Criminal. David ignored him and looked directly at Elliot. Exhibit A. A signed, notarized confession from the realtor, Mr. James Pierce, detailing his and Ms. Emily's conspiracy to commit wire fraud and property fraud, dating back 18 months. Emily let out a small, strangled gasp. Her eyes darted to Elliot. He wouldn't. He did, David said coldly. In exchange for a reduced sentence. It seems he didn't appreciate you setting him up to take the full fall. He slid a second file. Exhibit B, the full, unedited video and audio recording from my client's home, in which Mr. Elliot admits to his knowledge of the fraudulent loans, makes threats against my client, and attempts to physically assault her. Elliot's face went from pale to a mottled, sickly gray. That's inadmissible, you can't record. My client's home is in a one-party consent state, and the security system has clear signage, David said, bored. It's perfectly admissible, and it clearly refutes your claim of being an unwitting victim of the trust. Finally, David pushed a third, very thick file toward Emily. And Exhibit C, a complete, itemized forensic accounting of your private, social media account, Ms. Emily. complete with time-stamped, geotagged posts of you committing your crimes, alongside the full, unredacted testimony of all 15 of your victims, who are now part of a class action lawsuit. The district attorney's office found this file particularly compelling. This was the public humiliation. This was the showdown. It wasn't a crowded room. It was a small, quiet, legal coffin. Elliot and Emily just sat there, frozen, as the full weight of their ruin settled on them. All the lies, all the arrogance, all the boss babe hustles and sure-thing investments. All of it was reduced to 3 neat, damning files on a deposition table. Emily was the first to break. Her polished mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated. She let out a high, keening wail. You did this," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Elliot. "You and your stupid, half-baked ideas. She'll just roll over," you said. "She's weak," you said, "you worthless, pathetic." "Me," Elliot exploded, his chair scraping back. "This was your idea, the side hustle, the we deserve it plan. You're the one who couldn't stop bragging. You're the one who got us caught." Their lawyer just put his head in his hands. But the climax wasn't their screaming. It was the moment that followed. The moment Elliot, realizing his life was over, had a final, powerful moment of realization. His rage vanished, replaced by the same terrified, pleading look he'd had in my foyer. He turned to me. "Nicola," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, Nick, I'm your brother, you can't let this happen, call it off. Please, I'll pay you back, I swear." I looked at the man who had tried to steal my life's work, who had tried to frame me for his crimes, who had stood by while our father called me the problem. I saw the ruin of a man I had once loved, and I felt nothing, just a vast, cold, empty peace. I stood up. "David, I think we're done here." That was the triumphant action. It wasn't a yell. It wasn't a speech. It was me, turning my back and walking out of the room, leaving him to face the consequences he had so meticulously built for himself. The spell wasn't just broken, it was annihilated. The downfall was swift and total. Elliot, facing federal fraud charges, took a plea. He was sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security prison. Emily, in light of her full cooperation, i.e., turning on Elliot and her realtor partner, received 5 years probation. But the class action lawsuit from her victims, combined with the IRS investigation into her undeclared income, left her financially and socially bankrupt. She lost the house, the influencer career, and I heard custody of her sons, who were now living with her sister. The beach house sold in a week, for well over the asking price. The dissolution of the trust was clean. The money was wired to my private accounts, and the Heron Hill Family Trust ceased to exist. But justice isn't just about spreadsheets and sentences. It's about healing. A few weeks after the sentencing, I got a call from my father. It was the first time he had reached out. His voice was old, tired, and stripped of all its bluster. "Nicola," he said, and I could hear him weeping, a quiet, broken sound. I'm so sorry. I was so wrong. I was a fool." I had prepared myself for every eventuality but this. I had built defenses against his rage, his disappointment, his accusations. I had no defense against his genuine remorse. I drove to his house. It was clean. He had done the dishes. He was sitting at the small kitchen table, the envelope of evidence I had given him sitting in front of him like a judgment. "You were a good daughter," he said, not looking at me. "You were the best of us. You were the only one who ever did anything. And I punished you. You for it because I was jealous. Because you were a better man than me or your brother ever were." He finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. I know I don't deserve it, but can you ever forgive me?" I sat down across from him. The architect in me saw the foundation. It was cracked, damaged, and had borne too much weight for too long, but it was still there. It wasn't my job to fix him, but maybe I could help him rebuild. "I don't know, Dad," I said honestly, "but we can have a cup of coffee, and we can start." The reconciliation wasn't a single scene. It was a slow, quiet process. It was him coming to my office, not to ask for anything, but to see the library renders and saying, "It's beautiful, Nick. Your mother would have loved it." It was me, helping him set up a real budget, one based on his actual pension, and him sticking to it. I used my own resources and network, not to bail anyone out, but to ensure justice was served. I paid for therapy for my nephews to help them deal with the trauma of their parents' implosion. I made a donation to a victims' fraud fund. The story ends not with a bang, but with a quiet afternoon. I'm in my new apartment, a penthouse overlooking the city I helped shape. The walls are all glass. My father is here, helping me water my plants. He's quieter now, more thoughtful. We don't talk about Elliot. We don't talk about the past. We talk about the future, about the new park I'm designing, about the baseball game.